Okay, welcome everyone. I'm David Rammel, editor of Virtualization and Cloud Review, here to welcome you to our summit titled Trust No One Summit, Why You Should Modernize Your Security Posture with Zero Trust and How to Do It, brought to you by Rubrik. Before we start today's three-session event, we do have some announcements. First, we want to let you know this event is being recorded and will be available for future viewing. You'll receive an email when the replay is available, generally within the next few days. Also, each of today's three sessions will be followed by a 5 to 10 minute Q&A. So please be sure to put your questions into the Q&A area of your console as they come up so we can get them answered for you by our experts. And during today's third session, we will be giving away a NutriBullet Ultra Personal Blender. But you must be present to win, so be sure to stay on for the entire event. Finally, we do have resources from our sponsor Rubrik available on the console right now, so please download and check those out. It's because of Rubrik underwriting this content that we can bring you this summit, so we thank them for supporting the community and ask you to check out those resources so we can bring you more events in the future. Now on to the first session of today's summit, the case for Zero Trust. This session features Dave Kawula, Managing Principal Consultant at Tycon Elite Consulting, and Emil Cabot, Principal Consultant at Tycon Elite Consulting and 9-time Microsoft MVP. Dave is a Microsoft MVP with more than 20 years of experience in the IT industry. He's a leading technology expert for both local customers and large international enterprises. His background includes data communications and networks within multi-server environments, and he has led architecture teams for virtualization, System Center, Exchange, Active Directory, and Internet gateways. Emil specializes in enterprise data center and deployment solutions. Author of numerous books on modern technologies, he leverages his extensive experience with MSPs to guide organizations in optimal cloud adoption. He is actively involved in running MVP Days Online, blogging on checkyourlogs.net, and presenting at conferences such as Ignite, VMon, Tech Mentor, Tech Ready, and MVP Days Community Roadshow. Guys, it's great to have you here. Please take it away.
Awesome. Thank you very much, David, for the kind introductions. It's my real pleasure here to have you on, Emil. I know it's been a little while since we've had a chance to do one of these online sessions, and this is really one of the best parts of my week is getting a chance to have these conversations. And what a relevant topic that we're going to be talking about here today with kind of the case for Zero Trust. So, Emil, you happy to be on here today?
Yeah, it's great to be here, David. So thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we get going, I think just in the state of world affairs that we're in right now, I think that this conversation around zero trust, cybersecurity, hardening infrastructure is just one that just continues to evolve in day-to-day discussions at almost every organization that we're at. Because at the end of the day, a posture of saying, well, it's not us. It's not going to hit us. It's not going to happen to us. It's only going to happen to upstream business partners. And, maybe knock on wood, we're just lucky we've never had a problem. Those types of discussions are disappearing for all the work that I'm doing in enterprise. I know you're seeing the same thing, Emil. And so when we look at how to take and head down this road of, hardening infrastructure, moving into the world of zero trust, I think that moving forward today, one of the first gold nuggets of the session is that even if you made a handful of changes a day, you're making a difference. And so this whole process of hardening infrastructure can be very overwhelming and daunting for a lot of our infrastructure teams. And when I work with them, that's the advice I give them. Make small changes, move things forward. Every day, take a step forward, because sitting back and planning this for months and months and months is going to take and leave you in a very vulnerable state. Let's say at the end of the year, your goal is you want to make, let's say, 1,000 changes to improve your infrastructure. Well, start making a few a day, and at least you're moving that needle forward. What are you seeing out there, Emil, and kind of what's your thought of kind of the state of affairs right now in the world?
Well, just on to that, very much so, right? Don't let perfect be the enemy of good. As you go in and light up any of these tools, I'll pick on, Microsoft Defender right now. The first time you go in and light that up and you've onboarded your devices, you're going to have a very, very low secure score, guaranteed. There's, a whole bunch of things in there that need to be fixed, and they're vulnerabilities, and it's dragging your score down. If you look at that and say, how do I need to get that to 100% by the end of the month, you're never going to get there. And the key is just to take it bit by bit. You can sort by priority and start taking the heavy hitters first. The biggest thing is not to do it too fast, because as we go through and lock down these vulnerabilities, these CVEs, they're at some point going to impact something in production. And if you've just gone through and made a bulk of 150 changes to get your score from 25 to 50, now you don't know what it is that broke. And going back at that point to try and figure out which one is going to take you a lot more work. So it is a process, but we just had to take it piece by piece and make sure that we do our due diligence and test properly, because as always, we don't want to just be throwing this stuff into production.
Well, and also, sorry, no, go ahead.
No, finish off, Dave.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, as the world evolves with cyber threats, one of the things that, we have to keep in mind is as we start driving that score up, this is a merry-go-round that you're on, everyone. This is a never-ending merry-go-round, because just as you nicely clean things up, there's going to be something else that's going to pop in. And so it's something that it's really hard for us in IT, because we like to delineate a start and a finish date to our projects. This is a never-ending project, unfortunately. I hate to burst everyone's bubble.
Yeah, and the big problem is once one of these vulnerabilities get identified in your tenant and it gives you something to do, those bad actors have gotten that same notification, right? So now it becomes a race to finish to see who gets there first, whether we get it protected or whether they can find a way to make use of the exploit, right?
Yeah,
so ultimately.
Sure.
And a lot of times we don't know if we're being actively targeted, especially if we're just looking at starting to implement these things today. We don't have that visibility. We don't know if that attempt is even being made, right? So that's one of the things that we also need to do to find out and get monitoring on, is to really find out, is this something that I need to implement right now? Or can I safely take 2, 3, 4 days to test this out and implement it?
Well, right. And in this kind of principle of zero trust, it can be hard for IT teams to have multiple accounts that you have to use to log in inside of your infrastructure. We're used to basically having that single account that we're using to log into everything, and removing that stuff can be very difficult from a human element factor as well, as we go through and take a look at this. So I guess the starting point that we'll have here, Emil, for today's session is, let's dive in a little bit about looking at the traditional security model that we have. We typically have, 2 and 3 tier infrastructure. And the 2 and 3 tier infrastructure that we have inside of our racks is, we typically have some storage, and we'd have some networking gear, and we have some servers. Modern infrastructure is taking us to a 2 tier where we're hyper-converging that infrastructure. Great, we have something that's there. Then we have some type of connectivity that we're providing on the inside of the network with some switches that we're having distributed all throughout our campuses. Wonderful. Fiber, however we're connecting everything, MPLS networks. And then there's going to be some type of a perimeter that we're going to have. And that perimeter defense is typically some type of, hopefully, modern next-gen firewall that we're looking at as, defense mechanisms. And so that, ironically enough, I still see this at almost every organization I come to. And so it's a very standardized design that we have. And so, what are some of the things that we do from a perimeter perspective is that, okay, let's do some geo blocking. Let's do some country blocking. We're really worried about the state of affairs with, what's going on with Russia. Let's country block Russia. Let's take and go through some of these pieces. Well, modern threat actors are not kids sitting in basements and garages or kids at school, right? This is advanced state-sponsored threat actors that are coming through. For example, I'll give you one that I'm working on here this week. Is that we have phishing email come through at a customer of ours, and it was a high-level executive that ended up clicking on the link, and it actually took him to a .ru page that was actually hidden behind Cloudflare. And so the problem is that Cloudflare is a kind of global ENS provider, and they're going to take and they're going to mask that traffic, and so that connection punched through there. So that when you look at the IP address, it's owned by Cloudflare, which runs a lot of infrastructure in the world. So all of a sudden we're like, okay, immediately block that IP address. We looked it up, but when you dig into it, you're knocking out a whole bunch of additional services. So inherently, what's happening now, what I'm seeing with these attacks is they're shots across the bow, testing the security teams to see really what they're going to do. So now all of a sudden, if I can just fire shots across your bow, Emil, and you're going to immediately as a posture go, block the URL, block the IP address on the firewall. Well, guess what? We took down a whole bunch of services that was running inside of some of our physical locations that were really important. We took down some of the manufacturing cells because of that. And so it's just like that posture perimeter security is not enough anymore. You got to dig into some of these pieces. And so that's number one. Well, number two, go ahead.
The big thing there is, we have this great, physical security implementation in our organization. And, when it comes to manufacturing, that makes sense. With a lot of other organizations today, once you get behind that perimeter, the only thing inside it now are servers, right? Nobody's in the office anymore. Everybody's away. Right. So now your access into your network is no longer contained within that perimeter. Right. So the data is gone. Now you're talking about this attack going shot across the bow at a major manufacturing organization. You think, yeah, well, that's, somebody that would get targeted. I'm seeing the exact same thing with a small oil and gas company with 20 people. Right. It's spray and pray, not just targeting the organization. They're looking to see anybody and everybody that's going to have these exposures vulnerable. Okay, now you go.
Absolutely. And so we actually have a great question that just came in here. And by the way, for those of you that are listening to the session today, Emil and I love to take sessions in line during the show. So if you have questions that are burning, fire them into the Q&A panel that you've got in your console. We'll get to absolutely as many as possible. So we've got a question here from I believe it's from James. It might be Lynn, I'm not sure. But so anyways, thank you very much for that question. We really appreciate it. And it's a really, really relevant one to what we're talking about, which is for organizations currently relying on legacy security models, what are the key challenges and considerations when transitioning to a zero trust architecture? And I'll just give a really short answer to this one is the people factor is going to be the hardest thing that you're going to have as a challenge. Your existing IT teams, if you're telling me that you've got legacy systems in place, that probably means you have a legacy thought process with your IT professionals that are working at that organization. As you move to modernize this with zero trust, you're also going to be leveraging tools and things that you can use to defend your network as well. And that's going to change and evolve the way that you're doing business. All right, so that human element, we'll talk about this a little bit as we go through the show, but that's a big one for it. The last one on this particular one with the traditional security model, this is one of the ones that is always of biggest concern. Is number one is the insider threats. So for example, the economy is it's struggling a little bit right now. We're coming out of global pandemic, and the reality of things is that we've got administrators that are inside of the network, and they have admin rights to certain areas and functions. And just so we're having an understanding that there is program dark web wise where we can sell credentials, for example, for cash. And so that insider threat is something that, is of great concern, because once somebody is inside with any level of admin credentials, they're elevating, and then their time to actually executing an attack with either ransomware, where they're looking for some cash, they're looking to take and extort you by taking your data, or they're looking at something like jackware, where there's no real cost beyond just destroying your infrastructure. That can happen in a matter of hours. So we really have to watch those admin rights. All right, so let's jump into our first topic here that we've got around zero trust principles, Emil. And I will take you into the first one here, and I'll pass this one over to you. Assume breach. What does that mean? Like, assume breach? We're paying for modern defenses. We've got, XDR solutions. We've got managed detection and response now. We've got antivirus solutions. We've got modern next-gen firewall. Assume breach? Like, we're going to assume that somebody's already in the network? The answer is yes. It's not if you're going to get hit, it's when you're going to get hit. And there's a likelihood that somebody's already inside of a portion of your network. I just dealt with one this week where we had a malware alert that was triggered through our XDR solution. And it had hit 3 times. And when we went and we looked at the machine, I took a look at the local admins group, and there was 27 additional local administrators that were added. There was a script that was adding a new local admin daily, and they're changing the name. And so with local admin rights on that box, you can go ahead and you can bypass, nearly anything that's running on there. And so we can still catch it with the XDR solutions that are on there. But the problem is that, what type of damage and where were they reaching out to from there? And so that mentality of assume breach, what are you seeing in regards to that one specifically out in the field right now, Emil? And how are you seeing the customer base that you're dealing with deal with this?
I find it very hard to get specifically security teams to admit to this level, right, and start to track things back that way. But unfortunately, we're seeing it, right? It was just before Christmas. We had a client. This one was scary. We had a client, and their workstation was compromised. Anyway, long story short, what they ended up doing was modifying the local routing table on the workstation. They couldn't get payload onto the machine because the firewalls and everything in the environment were protecting it. So what they did was they ended up rewriting the local routing table on the machine so that when it downloaded this month's patches from Microsoft, it would download a specific patch from their servers instead. And because it was all handled through DNS and it was coming through content delivery networks, it was allowed, right? Because it was an accepted package, and the payload was able to get down, and using their rights, they were able to execute and launch the attack, right? And unfortunately, it's until we experience something to that degree that the eyes don't get opened.
Well, right, and then the other thing that I've seen happen a lot is loose desktop admin credentials. And so, for example, from a social engineering perspective, when I'm looking at this, I could just I could make your workstation really slow. It's not hard to make your workstation really low with limited rights, right? I can just bog down your machine with just ping commands. Right? I issue enough ping commands, I can bog down your machine, just increase packet size, and I'm gonna start jacking up your processor. It's gonna be slow. What are you gonna do? You're gonna call into the service desk. Okay, you're gonna call into the service desk. Now somebody's gonna log in with those local admin credentials to try to fix the situation. Well, the problem that you run into is that, this endpoint was one of these loose ones that was out there from when we added VPNs for everybody from COVID. And this workstation happened to be in somebody's home. And this workstation happened to maybe not have BitLocker or drive encryption on it. And it was very easy to just go brute force and reset the local admin password offline. And, because you don't have necessarily control over all of what's going on. And the other thing is that one of the next big gold nuggets for everybody is there's a concept of to bring your own device is very bad news for us in the security world, because we have next to no control over these devices. And more specifically, I have no control over somebody's 14-year-old kid going and clicking on who knows what on that machine, and the ability to take and lock down and control that admin access on there, right? And so that becomes very problematic. And so those breach points become very easy. And that's that kind of point about assumed breach. Everybody's asking, well, how does this happen? How does it happen? It's actually not as hard as you think, right? And so with zero trust, one of the things that comes into here is, the principle of least privilege. Admin rights for users, absolutely not. We escalate, we elevate on demand. Make sure that you're implementing Microsoft LAPs, so you have separate admin credentials on every single box. And then there comes the principle inside of zero trust with what's called just-in-time access and privileged identity management, where we can basically request access for a specific period in time, and then those rights are taken away. Don't leave what are users and what are called privileged groups for an extended period of time. For example, many of us have worked with Active Directory, right? We've worked with Active Directory for now almost 25 years, believe it or not. I feel really old right now, Emil. But Active Directory on-prem, there's a group inside of there, a privileged group inside of there called Enterprise Admins and Schema Admins. Well, by default, people think that you have to be a member of those groups to do your day-to-day work, and it's not true. The only point of a Schema Admin is to extend the schema, so that group should actually be empty. And that leads into that point of, privileged identity management and least privilege, right? Just don't add yourself to additional groups that aren't necessary. And then make sure that you're monitoring this. You've got monitoring solutions in place to take and track changes to things like access to privileged groups, because one of the things that happens during a breach is the bad guys are going to try to elevate their credentials. So make sure you're monitoring for adds to domain admins and, changes to local admins. We can do all of this now through advanced threat hunting to track these capabilities, right? Now, when you're going to take and you're going to implement zero trust, because we're kind of at the beginning of this whole picture, you haven't implemented zero trust. What's one of the biggest problems that we face? When we're starting this and we're locking down accounts that had like global tenant admin rights to Office 365 and Azure and your other cloud providers that are out there, and saying, no, we're not just going to do that with a single account. We need to back this up. We need to take and have break glass accounts. And it's all of a sudden they're like, oh my gosh, I have 20 different accounts you need to log in with. Yes, get yourself a good password manager and make sure that you're going to take and you're going to balance that out, because having that single account is it's not a good idea, and it's not really supported anymore. So in regards to this human element, and when you're walking into an organization that's just picking this up, do you find there's a big resistance to change as you're starting this process?
Everywhere, specifically with the administrators and the executives. You walk into some organizations and there's 17 domain admins. There's 2 that should be there, right? So those 15 people, it becomes an HR issue, right? And, I've said for years, IT is not an HR tool. And we have a friend, what's Steve's quote about security not meant to be your friend?
Oh, security is not meant to be a matter of convenience.
Right. So that's it. And unfortunately, especially with us in IT and, in service desk or those of us that have worked in the service desk realm, as we've built up our career, we have this unquenchable need to make people happy, right? We work in a thankless job, and one of the things that gives us benefit is, seeing people enjoy when we fix something, right? Or when we make their job easier. This is not that, right? This is deliberately making your job harder. And unfortunately, that's the nature of the beast. There's nothing we can do about that. Yes, this is harder. Yes, the passwords are painful to type in. You cannot remember them. But this is the world that we live in. And unfortunately, Basically, and what we've had to do a couple of times now is when people have come back and continually pushed back, went to the union about this, right? We ended up a couple of times having to give them paperwork to sign and basically make them assume risk. Because if they're not willing to follow along with our corporate standards, they're now a risk to the organization. So if your account now gets compromised and your account is what's used to ransom our organization, then you better be carrying insurance to cover that, because we're going to come after you.
Well, yeah, and along those lines, I was just involved in a project where we were taking out access to, totally business sites like Facebook, TikTok, Snapchat, WhatsApp, the usual suspects that are out there. And within one day, because with Defender, they have cloud app protection now, and you can actually see the landscape of what everybody's accessing through the XDR agents that are loaded on all of the endpoints. And so we go ahead and we block Facebook, thinking, okay, well, yeah, that's a smart move. Let's block Facebook. 450 users on Facebook in the organization. That's probably not everybody requiring access. And then the pushback that we got from this was actually from the marketing department, where they were actually using Facebook to find and hire new employees. So like, okay, fair enough. We'll open it up. And then, there was TikTok competitions that we were doing as well that nobody in IT was aware of. Okay, well, I guess we'll open that up too. And yeah, just some of those challenges, right? But one of the big things that I find, Emil, is building a security-aware culture is something that starts with one word. It starts with the word communication. And it's something that we often struggle with in IT. And so we need to make sure that we're having a constant level of communication with our end users, not just one-offs. So as the risks are increasing, one of the things, and this is another gold nugget for everybody, one of the things I want you to consider is have a weekly email that goes out to all users from IT, just in regards to the realm of cybersecurity. That's going to be 52 a year. I understand all of that, but it's going to be, hey, it's your friendly IT department here. We're noticing an uptick in the phishing campaigns. Just a reminder, always check the URL before you click on something. We do have measures implemented like safe links from Office 365 that are going to try to help us and protect. And you can start explaining some of these buzzwords to the end users, right? The consumers of the security solutions that we're putting in, because then we can have a realistic conversation with them when we have some type of an incident. And so it's not like, well, I didn't know that I wasn't supposed to do this, or I didn't know I wasn't supposed to click. No, we send the emails and we're informing everybody of these changes. Oh, hey, everyone, there's an uptick in, gift card scams. Your CEOs will never ask you to go buy gift cards. So if you get a request for that, it's not us, just as an FYI, right? But that word communication is so key.
ChatGPT is really good at generating these emails for you. Another thing that's really, really cool is once you've sent out a few of these, to find out if people are actually reading them and how socially vulnerable your organization is, specifically for you that are using Defender. Inside of Defender, you can create simulated phishing emails. And you can send those out to your users in your environment. And if they fall for the bait, you can get reporting back and then enrolling them in some lunch and learns to help make sure that they're more technically savvy.
The other piece of the cybersecurity and building a cybersecurity aware culture inside of not only your user bases, this is for IT as well. If you're using Defender right now, we both Emil and I are Microsoft professionals, so we work a lot with Microsoft tools. So I understand there's other ones that are out there. So same idea. It's in your security portal. Give access to your entire IT team to the security portal, read-only access, so that they can see what's going on, because there's threat analytics in there. There's information they can read up on. Don't just rely on what's being kind of spoon-fed. Give them access. Let them see, because that's how you're going to train everyone around part of this process. We recently just did this at one of the organizations, And now we're getting a lot more buy-in because they're saying, wow, this is kind of real. And the other thing is in a lot of those tools, they'll give you a to-do list of things that you can work down. Start working down that to-do list, right? Because it's telling you, hey, these are the highest risk items, do them. And sometimes there's just some really easy low-hanging fruit that you can pick off as well.
Giving read-only access of that portal to your Tier 2 support team is probably one of the most valuable things you can do there. Give them access and show them how to hunt, because not only will they start resolving issues that normally get escalated up to the server or security teams, but also as an organization, you'll be able to find out which members of that team really pick up on it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Now, I'm not going to focus on this particular topic too much because I noticed the next session coming up is more on getting the users onboarded and the kind of training and stuff that's going to be required. But one of my big things and pushback I get from users is you're breaking my application and my functionality that I require to do my job. All right. So if I'm like a CAD engineer or something like that, I need that CAD application to work. Yes, I understand that, but the code that's being used for that particular application is 20 years old. No, I need exactly this particular thing to do my job. And so that's a big piece of pushback that we get from the end users when we're locking this stuff down. And so when you're dealing with things like that, pick up the phone and get in touch with the software vendor and find out if there's a new version, cut a ticket, have those conversations. Because if you expect the consumers of the tech to do this, it's not going to happen. And so find out if there's an alternative approach to doing this and say, hey, listen, they've actually came out with this alternative rendering tool that we can use in high secure environments, and it fixes our problem. A little bit of training, couple days, you're on your way. Sometimes it's a lot more difficult, but just pick up the phone and actually, call and do some research on these pieces. All right. So from Microsoft's perspective, Microsoft is all in on Zero Trust. It is part of almost every discussion that we see now in regards to, the security frameworks that they're providing. And to the point, Emil, that I will say as few as like 4 years ago, Microsoft was kind of nowhere to be found on the Gartner Magic Quadrant for security. Like you didn't really think about, Microsoft as your go-to security partner that was out there. Now they're right up there as a leader. Why? Because holistically, they can manage the security end to end. And where they really, really shine is in the identity piece, because almost every organization has some form of Active Directory, hybrid Entra ID, or Azure AD is used to know it. And so that piece of it was huge, right? And so one of the things I'm gonna give you, and you're gonna get these little gold nuggets as we go, and this is gonna be one for you. Don't be a victim of next finished syndrome. And what do I mean by that? Okay, let's take an example of building a Windows 10 device. You can take and you can download boot media from Microsoft, and you can pop in the USB stick and you can install a copy of Windows 10 or 11, right? I would say that that's probably a fair statement. And probably anyone on this call has probably done this and done it multiple times. I know you can push out automated, but in that sense, that system is really next finish. Microsoft by default doesn't harden that stuff because they make it optimal for usability. It's up to you to harden it, okay? And so we have to harden those devices. Okay, I understand that. I get that. We'll harden the devices. Hardening your portals. When you go spin up Office 365 and you initially put in your credit card and you're the first one to build that portal, you basically have next finish. It's not coming to you pre-hardened. And the same thing goes for your Azure tenant and your identity inside of Entra. It is not all locked down by default. There are steps that you have to take to lock these pieces down. And for example, I know you do a ton of work with conditional access, Emil. Is conditional access fully configured by default, or are there things that individuals on this call need to look at before taking and lighting this up for your end users?
100%. There's not even templates for everything that you need.
And so what are some of the things that our audience should think about specific to like intra-hardening, conditional access, pieces like that? What are some of the things they should think about?
Well, I mean, the major thing about conditional access is protecting access to your data, right? So when you're creating those, you have to visualize the different places where people will be accessing your data from and whether you want that to be allowed or not. You also need to determine, what level of verification you want to have before you give someone access to confidential data, right? So, for example, if the organization doesn't want people to have to do multi-factor when they're in the office, then that's fine. We can configure that, right? But that will mean that we need to create two policies to ensure our access. We're going to have one for on-prem and one for off-prem, because I guarantee you everybody off-prem, we're going to want to have multi-factor, right? What level of control do we need to have when we're on public internet connections, right? One of the big problems that we still run into these days is shoulder attackers, right? Where people look over your shoulder when they're typing in a password. So if we're not using multi-factor off-prem, that becomes a very, very real concern. The other one is blocking access to countries, right? The majority of your attacks are going to come from 10 countries. So we have to create that policy. That's not default, and it requires a little bit more steps than everything else, but we need to actually find out where our end users are. We implemented one a couple of months ago for a union, and it turned out that one of the executives was actually in Tunisia dealing with his mom who was in the hospital. He hadn't told anybody at work, and we ended up blocking him out, and it caused a lot of problems. So, right, you need to find out exactly what that is and what you can safely block. Now, unfortunately, when it comes to blocking foreign countries like that, I mean, personally, I want to go as restrictive as possible. So we're in Canada, and Dave and I do a lot of work with the Canadian federal government. So, with people that interface strictly with inside of the same country, we don't allow any access to our Office 365 environment from anywhere. Right now, people travel. So we need to have that policy now put in place. And unfortunately, it becomes procedure for everyone. When you're traveling, if you want to work or have access to work while you're traveling, then you're going to need to put in a request.
Yeah, absolutely, Emil. And so along those lines of, protecting organizations, multi-factor authentication is one that I know that everyone on this call has heard about. I don't know how deep you're in with your configurations on this, but here's the rule of thumb that you have, is that if you RDP to it, MFA it. If you have privileged devices or networks, for example, that give you out-of-band access to your servers, MFA that. And I'm talking about IPMI, ILO, DRAC, those out-of-band networks that you have. For goodness sakes, reset the default passwords as well. But you can easily take and get MFA solutions in place for those. Maybe not necessarily all Microsoft. There's other great vendors that do multi-factor, and I don't really talk vendors on these calls, but there are great vendors that are out there that do it, right? And so along those lines, we take a look at, some of the additional security measures that you can take. What are your thoughts on, organizations moving to passwordless authentication? You've got Hello, you've got facial rec, you've got fingerprint, you've got so many different ways that you can go passwordless now. You're seeing a big adoption, or are we still seeing, a lot of requirements for passwords that are out there?
I don't see a lot of people going to passwordless yet. People are interested in it. But in order for passwordless to work, you really have to be comfortable with multi-factor, because the authentication now comes from, another place, right? It doesn't just let you in. So a lot of organizations, it really becomes down to a policy thing, and just getting that policies rewritten. It's hard enough right now to try and get everybody to do MFA when off-prem. So I think we have one client that has went to passwordless. They were new, and it was a incentive to using the new tech.
Awesome. All right. So the next one I want to talk about in regards to zero trust and looking at holistically your infrastructure. Device compliance is a big one as well too, because we saw this in early days when you'd go on to log into a VPN, and there would be kind of pre-authentication scripts that would run before we would let you into your infrastructure, right? We want to make sure that you're running the antivirus client, and the antivirus client has the latest definitions. And if you don't have the latest definitions, the script that's going to hit you in the quarantine zone is going to take and is going to force you to do this, right? So now in the modern world of device compliance, we kind of do something similar, but now what we're going to do is, instead of throwing you into a quarantine zone, we can actually create conditional access policies for devices that fall out of compliance to actually not be able to authenticate, or we can shield them and have them do other things. And so that part of it is a big piece of this. And so I know a lot of you on this call are probably using Intune for your MDM right now. And so this is a piece that's very integratable inside of there with your CA conditional access policies. And so Emil, are you seeing organizations having a combination of that with their conditional access policies and integrating that with device compliance?
100%. A lot of, especially with devices being offline more these days than normal. We don't have, machines that are now online 24 hours a day. They spend a lot of time in bags. And people will bring their machines on and quickly do something and then turn them off again. And that doesn't give the machine enough time, right, to upload all of its information to complete its cycle. So this will ensure those stragglers are getting patched before they get completed. The other part where this really gives us value is back to that bring your own device scenario that you mentioned earlier, Dave, right? By using conditional access, device compliance, and what we call app protection policies in Intune, I can safely allow end users to access corporate data on their personal device. And then in those situations, I still retain access to the data. I retain control of the data. And what I do is, through the conditional access policies, I'm going to state that the machine, must have a specific patch level or must have antivirus or encryption present before it can access the data. And then if the machines aren't compliant, what happens is, because I don't manage the machine, I can't remediate it myself, right? So the end user gets a message and says that your device is not compliant, fix this, and then you could try again and access. So it allows us to sort of start to let people use their personal devices without too much risk.
Awesome. Well, Emil, we got a question that just came in here, and I'll let you take this one. So in the context of zero trust, how do you address the challenge of balancing security requirements with the need for productivity, especially in environments where quick access to resources is essential for day-to-day operations?
Security is everybody's concern. So if the organization is used to being able to, log into their machine and be able to do X within 30 seconds, and now it's going to be a minute and 30 because of additional security requirements, then really two things need to happen. Is one, we need to find out if we can reduce that time. But two, process needs to be updated, right? Because at the end of the day, yes, it's not going to be as easy as it always was. It's not going to be as quick as it always was to get in, but it is more secure and it will keep your organization up, right? It goes down to this is now a huge risk. And although, large scale, right? We've got a 200,000 node environment. A minute per endpoint is a lot of time. But what happens if that entire organization goes offline because of a ransomware attack?
Well, and in lines of that, we're seeing this on almost a daily basis with the threat actors coming in. We've got APP groups that are coming and attacking us all the time. And, one of the pieces in taking and going through this implementation, and we got a lot of great sessions that are going to be coming up shortly right after us here. But just if I had to pick a couple things that we want to talk about with just gaining gaining adoption for Zero Trust, one of the biggest pieces for me is making sure that you set realistic expectations around the timing of getting to the point of where you want to be. Don't come into this thinking that, in 30 days, we're going to have all of our security problems fixed. It's not like that. We're going to move the needle forward in 30 days, but is everything going to be fixed? No. At the end of the day, I don't think everything is ever going to be fixed because the threat landscape changes on an hourly or daily basis for us, right? If you watch the CVEs that are coming into your organization, you'll have new ones that are popping in almost every day or almost every other day. I'll take a great case in point. Our good friends at Citrix have absolutely been hammered with critical CVEs, and they just had a release that came out saying, we're advising within 7 days, go patch all your NetScalers that are out there. Well, I'm going to tell you, there's a lot of NetScalers that are out there in the world front-ending a lot of that Citrix traffic. Citrix alone has made a lot of work for my infrastructure teams in the last year. But, you've got to do it, right? And so the other piece around this is resourcing around this. Don't sell yourself short on your team saying, the existing server support team is now going to take care of doing all of the hardening and infrastructure pieces. Security is an investment for an organization. I think of it as like insurance. And so when we take a look and we're doing this, especially as proactive security measures, make investments in resources. I know cybersecurity professionals are hard to find out there right now, but make some investments here surrounding this piece. We're going to move. We've got time for one more quick topic, and then we're going to take a couple more questions, Emil. And this next one's going to be for you because I know that you have done a ton of work surrounding, AI, ChatGPT, some of these pieces. What's the future for security for those listening on this call in regards to integrating AI as part of your cybersecurity posture?
Well, yeah, this is absolutely huge, right? And it goes back to what I was talking about earlier when a CVE gets published. They're using AI, right? And they're using machine learning. So we need to have those same tools on the back end just to be able to protect against that, right? The uplift in large learning models in the last 14 months has been absolutely insane, right? No product ever has had this kind of uplift. And it's amazing just trying to get your head around what's available now and what to use. It makes it even more so. But yes, find a solution. There are really, really good ones out there now by the big names. Microsoft has a co-pilot for just about everything, right? And so we definitely need to be looking at how we can include that in our security posture.
And I think one of the other big pieces here, too, is that your Zero Trust configurations are not limited to your on-prem infrastructure. It's got to be on everything. Cloud environments, multi-cloud environments, it's on-prem. It's just that general posture that you have. Great question just came in from Brian. Thank you for that one. On the topic of AI, Emil, what are your thoughts on Copilot for Defender? And just before you jump into that, so for me, really quick 2-second piece on this, that is like having an entire SecOps team at your fingertips right now, available for you to help. And for example, one of the things I really like about it is the root cause analysis pieces saying, hey, this particular incident just took place and I need some help with, writing up root cause surrounding this and how we can potentially prevent this in the future. Help me with it. Boom, you're done, right? And so having those pieces of AI, I think, are huge, especially in your security tenant. And I'll leave the rest to you, Emil, because I don't think we as humans can keep up fast enough with the amount of information that's being driven at us from a security perspective.
No, and when we're going through an attack, like when we're going through a recovery or an active attack, there's a lot of things going on. We're pulled in so many different ways. It's very, very easy to get pigeonholed into a troubleshooting solution, right? You assume this is the problem and you start going down. And it may not be, until an hour and a half where we realize that, oh yeah, there is another way that this could be happening. Copilot will be great for that, right? Because not only can it help us, but it can also offer suggestions or places to look inside of our environment. This type of an attack, right, could be construed to attack this rather than this. So did you check here, right? And so just helping to offer suggestions or having, ultimately you're having another security expert at your fingertips, right? It's the key right now is getting that model focused down to the security level that we need, while still being modern enough to be useful for zero-day threats.
Absolutely. And so, Emil, we're going to wrap this up with one quick thought each here, okay? And so my closing thought on this, and the last thing for individuals on our session here to take away, is security can feel very overwhelming for everyone because there are so many different aspects that we feel that we need to take and we need to learn, and the pace of that learning is very challenging. So don't feel like you have to do everything. You need to have a certain baseline level to get started with this, but find partners that are experts in different domains with this. And so one of the things to look at is something called managed detection and response, not just where you're getting alerts, because my biggest concern is that the bad guys, the threat actors, they work 24 hours a day, they work all year long, and at a certain point in time, I'm going to be in bed. My team's going to be in bed. I don't run a 24-hour shop for our IT, right? And a lot of us are like this. So what goes bump in the night is of great concern to me. So those managed detection and response teams, there's many great ones that are out there. They're the ones that are going to help you. What you're looking for there is that when something happens, I want them to have the ability to isolate at a network level those devices that are potentially being compromised. I want them to start the investigation. I want them to potentially be able to get into my firewalls to adjust things. It's a very big partnership and trust factor that you get into with this. And I have a couple customers right now that are fully on board. And let me tell you, it's very interesting, even so interesting to the point that because they have full MDR solutions, basically full coverage for every hour and every minute of the day, cyber insurance premiums went way, way down for them by like almost 70%. So that's kind of my closing thought. So, Emil, closing thought, and then we'll hand it back over to David.
Microsoft is great at giving us amazing products that can do everything once they're configured. And they often, give us the blank vanilla infrastructure to set up as we deem appropriate. They've realized so many people are not using conditional access policies that they've started this year to create managed conditional access policies, and they're rolling them out to every single Microsoft 365 tenant. And the first one is just to make sure a multi-factor authentication is enabled. Conditional access is so important that Microsoft has broke one of their own big rules. and they're starting to manage things for everybody. That's my one thing. Go through your conditional access policy. If you're using Microsoft 365 in any capacity at work, or you're using Entra in any capacity at work, make sure you have those conditional access policies created, and make sure you create your break glass accounts for those policies at the same time. That's the one biggest thing you can do right now without going through your advanced threats to secure yourself.
Awesome. Well, Emil, unfortunately, we are at the end of our time for the session. Thank you so much for joining me today. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to my esteemed colleague, David Rammel. And thank you, everyone, for attending, and enjoy the rest of the show.
Okay, great stuff, David and Emil. Thanks for a great presentation and answering all those questions. Everyone else, stay tuned. We're going to take a short break and be back at the top of the hour for our second session of the day. Zero Trust focused end user training, tips, tricks, and pitfalls. So take this chance to check out those resources on your console provided by Rubrik, and we'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone, to our second session of today's summit. I'm David Rammel, editor of Virtualization and Cloud Review, and I'm moderating this session called Zero Trust focused end user training, tips, tricks, and pitfalls. It's presented by Greg Schultz, founder and IT analyst at Server Storage IO, an independent IT advisory, consultancy, and creative services firm. As a Microsoft MVP in cloud data center management and a 10-time VMware V-expert, Greg brings a diverse background to his work as a consulting analyst with a real-world perspective across applications, data infrastructures, hardware, software, and clouds. He's also the author of several books. Greg, it's great to have you here. Please take it away.
Great. Thank you, David. Hello and welcome everyone to today's session, Zero Trust Focused End User Training, Tips, Tricks, and Pitfalls. I am Greg Schultz, as Dave mentioned in that nice introduction. And with that, let's just get right into it here. There's a lot we're going to go through here, but here's our agenda. What we're going to go through is just a real quick setting up the big picture, reviewing the Zero Trust. But what are the components? Education and awareness, enabling Zero Trust, training tips and tasks, data protection for a Zero Trust environment, as well as best practices, tips, and recommendations. And a reminder, submit your questions as we go through. Just keep submitting the questions, and we'll have plenty of time at the end where we can dig into those. All right, so here's the thing. Everything is a perceived threat risk. Trust no one or nothing. Always verify. And it's getting more difficult today, especially with AI. In the previous session, we heard about how AI can be used, Copilot as that assistant, that helper, that force multiplier, if you would, to be able to help protect and preserve your environment. And part of that is needed because the bad actors are also using AI to attack your organization, to attack you, your coworkers, in different ways. They're getting more creative, whether it's using AI to generate better scripts so that when they're talking and reading off these scripts, they do sound more realistic and convincing, or even using AI in nefarious ways to set up websites, URLs that look convincing, or even doing voice and video phishing to really convince you. So with all that being said, don't be scared, be prepared. Know what the threat risks are, know what the applicable threat risks are and their particular impact to your organization, which over there on that left, this is a basic building block approach of detect, defend, deflect, diagnose, but also be ready to protect your organization so if you are impacted. And if you are impacted, what are those different threats? But more importantly, what's applicable and what's the impact? Is something going to cause a complete loss of access, a loss of apps or data? Is it going to be partial loss or destruction, damage or corruption or compromise of your data, theft or exposure? But what to do? What to do? a lot of that is right here, right now, today, which is getting started or revisiting. And that is know the threats, know the applicable business impact, also to your apps and your data. How to detect, diagnose, defend. And that's using smart tools, automated tools, AI tools, among others, but also leveraging that automation for that flexible, faster recovery and testing, and have a plan and have it up to date. And as a part of that, that also means you should ask the question, oh, wait a minute, I thought we were going to talk about zero trust here. What we're talking about sounds a little bit more like overall data protection. Yeah, absolutely. Bingo. They are so commingled. And that's, again, where we have to be prepared. Okay, so with that out of the way, let's dig a little deeper here. So what I've got here is you could look at this as a puzzle, okay? This is a puzzle. Everyone and everything are threats. Everything and everyone are not the same. So why treat everything and everyone the same? Okay, so over there on the left there, we've got different threats. Traditional phishing. Vishing, and as I mentioned briefly a moment ago, vishing is looking at things in terms of video phishing, voice phishing, where it's even more convincing, where maybe you get that phone call and it's somebody saying who they are, and they really aren't who they say they are, but they sound more convincing. And maybe they've even gone that next step using AI of leveraging somebody's voice and leveraging their inflections, their tonal, and putting that in such a way that you're like, hey, wait a minute here. Is this really the CEO calling me in the middle of the day, telling me that he's about to go into an important meeting and that I need to unlock his account because he can't remember his password? What do? Do you sit there and say, well, yeah, of course I'll unlock it if you're the CEO. It sure sounds convincing. And then all of a sudden you unlock it for a nefarious actor. What do you do? Or do you say, well, excuse me right now, I need to go get my supervisor and we need to look into this for you. What's your callback number? Okay? That's not made up. This is happening. This is how the nefarious the bad actors are starting to do things. But what are they doing? What are they after? They want your credentials. They want not just your data to expose that. They want your credentials because you may not be the target of their attack. You might be the means to getting to somebody else. In other words, somebody wants to get your credentials so that maybe they can get to the CEO, that they want to get to something and do something even more nefarious. So certainly it's enabling malware, viruses, denial of service attacks, theft, ransomware, causing damage, destruction, chaos, mayhem, disrupting things. And it could be to attack your brand reputation, your organization, financial, among other things. And these attacks are attacking on-prem, at the edge, in the cloud, your different apps and services in different layers. Okay, over there on that right, those are the buzzwords, the buzz terms, if we want to play buzzword bingo. But these are the different pieces, technology, tools that come together. And part of this puzzle is putting all these different pieces together. Proactive management, penetration testing, your red teams, your blue teams, education, awareness, which we're going to talk more about here. There's certainly the technology tools and services, the AI, the automation, the co-pilots, as well as the apps, both your own apps, enterprise apps, SaaS, management, remediation, keeping them up to date. Then we have over there in the left middle, identity and access management, authentication, multi-factor authentication, two-factor, policies, processes, governance, management tools, alerts, and reportings, both detection but also diagnostics and remediation. Data protection and recovery, being able to go and recover when something does happen, that you've got a good copy of your data, whether it's a good snapshot, checkpoint, consistency point, a backup, whatever that happens to be, something that's interval time based and that you can recover. There's certainly device management, local and remote, conditional access with policies, your different networks, servers, apps, storage, logical and physical. So all these things have to come together in order to enable this zero trust environment, this zero trust paradigm and way of thinking and securing things. Okay, so real quick, what does zero trust mean in a nutshell? Simple. It's really, really simple. It's controlling the access based on who a user and what a device is authorized to access particular resources, i.e. devices, services, apps, and across your network, whether it be on-prem, edge, cloud. But also, and this is the important part, also along with identity verification and trust. E.g., in other words, is who or what they say they are authentic? Do they possess the valid current credentials to access different resources and services? Just because somebody says they're a CEO, are they really the CEO? Just because somebody says they're tech support, network support, security, that they need you to do something, are they really who they say they are? I mean, if a security person calls you and says, hey, look, we've got an issue. I need for you to reset something and do this for me. Okay? They should be able to authenticate themselves to you, okay? And they should not get upset if you challenge or question them. That's one of the ironic things about a zero trust is that if you're being told, particularly as an end user or working with end users, not to trust anybody, well, how are you going to, do you trust the CEO to really be the person who says they are, that you're going to authenticate, or that security is really calling you? You know what? And outside of the workplace, this is happening on social media. It's happening via direct messages, SMS text, and different things like that, where somebody calls up, says, or texts you, and, hi, this is Facebook safety, and we're going to disable your account. Click on this link. Don't do it. If anything, forward it to Facebook safety and management, and let them come back to you and authenticate. So anyway, it all evolves around traditional security, data protection paradigms of the old world, trust but verify. Now it's verify before you actually trust. Okay, so with that in mind, let's dig into this a little bit deeper. And let's talk about part of the end user training tips, tricks, and pitfalls is understanding the scope, understanding the paradigm, understanding the threat risks, what can happen, so that we can talk about how to prevent them and how to work around them and what to watch out for. All right, so this is a traditional perimeter-based access methodology, i.e. using VPNs. And VPNs have worked, okay? We're not going to dump on VPNs. We'll leave that for a different day, different discussion, whatever. They still have a role, but we want to be aware of what some of the pitfalls are. And the challenge with VPNs, real simply, is that it's like the castle. Once you get in across the moat, across the drawbridge, into the castle, there's the paradigm mindset that you're safe within the walls of the castle. But now are you free to roam about the castle? Well, that's a similar approach, is that if you can VPN into an environment, are you free to roam around? Are you free to get up and move about? Are you free to get up and explore? Or are there additional locked doors? Are there additional layers that you have to work your way through to be able to get access to different things? Now, graft that onto a cloud environment, particularly a hybrid cloud environment, which what we would have here is that once you're in, are you still subject to access controls to get, say, from the edge, from the main office into the cloud, from one cloud provider to the other? Do you have different layers, different rings, different perimeters of protection and different authentication? And are you able to authenticate more than just based off of a IP address? What other credentials are there? Do you have that ability to detect that, hey, Greg is logging in, and about a half hour ago he logged in from Minneapolis, Minnesota, but all of a sudden now he's logging in from Tokyo, Japan. What's up with that? That's part where multi-factor, two-factor authentication comes in, where as I'm going in and accessing it, I get the alert. Here, I've got to enter in a code, or I get asked, is this really you? And I say, no, I'm still in Minneapolis. Somebody else in Tokyo is trying to use my credentials. Stop them, okay? So that's what we want to touch about real quickly, is where we've been and where we're going. We want to be able to have the authentication occur for different devices, different apps, different systems, different platforms, and with different granularity. And this also means allowing the access, allowing the credentials for the level of work that's applicable versus just saying, yeah, everybody can have admin, super user, just to make your life easier. Okay, so now let's build out on this a little bit more. And again, this is to understand where these different issues are, so that we can train and we can apply different technology tools, tricks, and pitfalls to watch out for. Okay, so wherever you see the little red asterisk, those are threat risks. Those are points, those are places that things can happen. The little green are areas where we can leverage user and device and app identification, access authorizations, okay? So, and not coincidentally, wherever there's a red, there should be a green authentication mechanism. And there may also be additional layers of protection where there may not be a red threat risk, but for best practices, put in some additional authentication. So what this means now, instead of just simply granting, hey, you've got access, you're into the environment, you're free to roam about. No, as you go in further and go into different layers and go in and work your way through the environment, there needs to be that authentication, that identification that you can verify. One, that you can verify who somebody is and that they really are who they say they are, that the device really is authenticated, that they really have the access to what they need. Okay, so for example, IT staff, that they've got the authentication that they can get into the environment to do their support, to do their jobs, but that there's access controls not only around regular data, databases, SQLs, NoSQLs, et cetera, but also that there's protections around where log files, where dumps are stored. As we look back at some of the recent incidents, and this is part of training and awareness, is not only did something happen, but what was the postmortem? How did some of these attacks occur? Well, somebody was able to gain access and capture log files, dump files, and then use AI tools and find authentication and find credentials, find tokens and things like that. So this is where it gets back to, is protecting at the device, protecting the browser, the different tools that are used on the app, even if you're using virtual desktops, especially if you're using virtual desktops where things are moving around. Okay, so let's build a little bit more out on this. So we talked about the zero trust, some of the big picture things. Let's dig into this a little bit more and look at some of the components. Okay, so there's the tools, the techniques, the technologies, the best practices and awareness. Okay, so one of the key things is having those rings, those layers of defense, but also segmentation as well as microsegmentation. Thus, zero trust spans security, data protection, networking, server, storage management, applications. It's an encompassing topic. It's not just a security, not just a network, not just a firewall. It touches and spans across many different locations as well as up and down the stack. Okay, so part of that zero trust is having inside the walls, physical, virtual, additional granularity, verifying that somebody is who they say they are, but also maintenance, applying timely maintenance and remediation of your systems, of your physical, of your virtual, of your containers, of your apps up and down the stack, but also of your remote devices, of your endpoints, making sure everything is up to date, both with software, but also with their policies for how they're managed. And also having that robust data protection, including backup, restore, snapshots, point-in-time copies. Okay, so some other aspects to this is that multifunction authentication, the two-factor authentication. And as you look at this, it's, well, yeah, it can be a pain at first. It can be a hassle at first. But once you get used to it and if you set it up, so for example, there's some things where I just have a thumbprint, or you could use an eye scan or something else that you don't have to type in your password all the time, where you don't have to type in a PIN, but you've got options there. But it's enabling it such that authenticate who you really are. Is that who you say you are? So you can do some things. And yeah, it can add an extra step as part of that, but it's also making sure everything is safe. So get used to it. It's the way forward. Again, it's all about verifying someone or something is authorized. It's also part of that real-time monitoring, detection, alerting, and reporting, so that if somebody is trying to use your credentials, if somebody is trying to do something, that hopefully the automation, the AI, the co-pilots, different things like that, the smart tools can all of a sudden kick off a rule and say, okay, we've detected something. Now let's start our response. Let's take our action. Do we need to do anything else? And again, part of that is factoring in the geolocation considerations. As I mentioned, that example where a half hour ago, I'm working in Minneapolis. Now all of a sudden there's that alert that I'm working from a device in Tokyo. No, I get the notification. Are you in Tokyo? No, I'm still in Minneapolis. That's part of that geolocation awareness, that factoring in that context aware. So there's also this other part about awareness and education of users of not only the threat risks, but also what to do and not do. We're going to expand on that here in just a moment. But there's also, again, as I mentioned earlier, is spanning across on-prem, cloud, hybrid, in different layers. And as we see on the chart here, we've got the vertical up and down on the right, but we've also got the horizontal across the bottom, working across these different environments. All right. We've talked about talking about education awareness, so let's talk about it. It's a dangerous world. The threat risks are everywhere. As I mentioned, don't be scared, just be prepared. There are the challenges that we've talked about in the past of the rings, the layers, that we need additional verification authentication. And here's the thing, when it really comes down to it, the zero trust environment, the zero trust paradigm, the zero trust approach should be a user and worker productivity and not a barrier. Okay, so we have to balance between zero trust for securing and locking down while enabling workers to get their work done, and do it in such a way where they don't have sticky notes with passwords written down, hidden in a drawer or something, that it needs to be productive and not a barrier. That zero trust should not cause workers to go out and find ways to circumvent security. And likewise, as a user or as a worker, things should be streamlined so that you can get your work done. All right. We touched on this one a little bit, and we're just going to move right by this and talk a little bit more about the education awareness. Okay, so attackers and bad actors are getting more sophisticated. As I mentioned a bit ago, they're using AI for the attacks, for their refining, their conversations and communications. And it used to be, and I used to comment on this all the time, is that until the attackers learn how to use a spell check, a grammar check, you could detect something just by looking at that. It was usually a tip-off that something was bad. Likewise, looking at a URL and say, this is obviously bad. It's getting trickier. I had a friend call up recently, and he was locked out of something. And I said, what'd you do? He said, well, this pop-up showed up, and it had the entities, the organization's logo. And he said, it looked convincing, so I clicked on it. I said, don't do anything else. Here's what you're going to do. Walked him through some things to do, and all of a sudden, his computer was fine. He had run into something where he saw the logo, he was convinced, okay, this must be legitimate, this must be valid. Or when you see a URL that maybe it's coming from LinkedIn, spoofing that it's coming from LinkedIn, and you see it, and it really looks convincing, and you just happen to glance at the URL, and you see LinkedIn in the text of the URL, but then a long list of numbers ending up with something like nefariousspambot.com. That'd be a red flag to me. Now, that's where automation, that's where AI tools, smart tools, detection tools should come into play and be able to detect that. One, that is a bad known address. This is a bad known threat, and they should be able to isolate that as a part of things. Or if you come across something, you flag it to help the tool learn. Organizations, banks, others up and down the stack, across different sectors, they've become very, very robust as well with their fraud detection, fraud management, expanding into phishing schemes. And I've had this where something doesn't look right. I'll call and talk to somebody at the bank or send them a message, and they're like, yeah, please send us the information. We appreciate it, okay? So you're seeing that more and more as a part of that. And again, it's not just the emails anymore. You'll get them in text messages, your SMSs, direct messages, where you're working on your smart device or a laptop, and maybe you happen to jump onto a social media or something else, or maybe even a Zoom or a Teams, and all of a sudden you get a message, hey, click on this, it's urgent. Is it really legitimate? Is it who that person says they are? Is it really them? That's part of it. So again, it's more encompassing with a lot more impact. So as I mentioned, there is that authentication. There is that 2FA, MFA. There is that enabling remote device management, authentication, and so forth. But also the big part here is trust yet verify. If you're sending a DocuSign out to somebody where you need them to sign something, give them a heads up. Make sure that DocuSign has something to reflect on who it is that's actually sending it out. But let somebody know, you say, yeah, fine, I'm going to send you a DocuSign, or I'm going to send you this later today. I'm going to send you this next week. Okay, good. Because I get them where they come in, it's like a DocuSign. I'm like, I don't know this. I don't know about this invoice. I don't know about that. Looking at it, it's like, yep, this is a spam. Why am I sending an invoice to myself or something along those lines? So this is part of it where we can't just simply ignore and shut everything down. We also just have to be aware. Is it a hoax or not? Is somebody just testing to see what you can do, how you're going to respond or not? So we have to verify, is it a threat or not? The phone call. When somebody calls, are they trying to capture your voice to be able to use as part of another attack via an AI tool? Okay? So the downside to all of this is that it's really causing us to be suspicious. If we're not going to trust anything, we're going to be suspicious of everything. That in itself is not a good aspect to it. But the big but, however, is that we can't just simply fall into that trap of somebody says, I'm the director of the department, reset my account for me, here's the new PIN I want, without validating them. And they shouldn't get upset or call you on the carpet if you do so. That's, I guess, in a nutshell, part of what we're looking at. We can't ignore email. We can't ignore email. It is still the probably largest point of where attacks are coming in, attempted attacks. We have to be very, very careful with that. The other part to this is around social engineering. And again, social engineering is leveraging the different tools, technologies, but techniques to convince you to do something, whether it's coming via the email, the text, the phishing, a DocuSign, whatever it happens to be. And you know what? Hopefully this is common sense, but sometimes common sense things aren't so common. Don't leave devices unlocked and unattended when not in use, and especially in public places. Get in that habit where you got to go up and go do something for a few minutes. If you're in a private, secure environment, lock it. Lock the laptop, lock the tablet, lock the phone, whatever it is. Just lock it. Make sure that it's just something simple. It's an easy habit to get into. Set it up such that you can use a PIN or other quick access to get back to your work. But in public, don't just sit there and walk away while your laptop is sitting or your tablet is sitting on a table, even if it is logged out. Please don't do that. I walk around going through airports or in lobbies, whatever it is, and I see that, I'm like, oh, geez. Don't do it. If you see somebody else do it, you have to say something, or take it up, especially if it's work-related. It's just something common sense, but we have to be careful with it. Okay, so what are some additional tips and tricks that we can look into? Okay. So we've got a couple of different things here. And a reminder to keep your questions coming in. What are your concerns? What are your challenges? What is your desired outcome? What is your timeline, your business mandate regulations? Has your organization already been attacked? Or have you been lucky and you're just taking all this in to be prepared, or because it's something nice to do on a Friday? What is it that you're trying to accomplish? Learn. Research, talk with others, the vendors, the service providers, the consultants. But look also beyond the technology. Look also beyond the tools to the best practices, to the policies. In particular, when it comes to how you're going to configure those tools, configure those technologies and those services. Are you going to follow the vendors' best practices, recommendations, suggestions, or are you just going to open things up? Are you going to use these new things in old ways, or start changing how you use these different things? And keep in mind that the best zero trust strategy and plan is the one that fits your organization needs, i.e. what you've talked about. So the vendors, they become, they're really, really robust. And they're looking for ways to differentiate themselves. And part of that is providing solution guides, the best practices, templates, reference architectures, health checkers, co-pilots, the list goes on. Leverage those. Get others involved. If you're working on something with a zero trust, get others involved across your organization in that management support, and be able to explain things such that if you're the IT people working with end users, provide that information to the end users of why you're doing something. Why are you doing things in this particular way? Why are all these policies, and why are all these regulations, and why do you have to do all these things? Explain that. Likewise, provide to the end users, how can they verify, how can they validate, how can they authenticate that it's somebody from IT or whoever that says who they are without causing a commotion. Likewise, is being able to have that back and forth, so to speak. So revisit and assess where and how encryption is being used, both at the core, at the edge, but on all your mobile devices, as well as when data is in flight. And assess your environment. How are you doing identity and access management today at these different locations? Revisit how you're using VPNs and other endpoint technologies. Okay, so policies, procedures. How well are they defined? Are they draconian, that they're going to be a barrier? Or do they protect things? Do they allow governance, allow your end users to be productive? Again, have that management buy-in that this is why you're doing it, and this is how you authenticate it. And ideally, there should be a policy that says somebody is not going to get in trouble if they challenge a higher up, a manager or some other person to authenticate who they are. There shouldn't be a backlash because you get a call from the CEO, and it really is the CEO, that they're jammed up, that they're in a problem, and you request to authenticate them, okay? There should not be a backlash. Will you get a gold star for the day? I don't know. But there shouldn't be a backlash. There shouldn't be that point and blame and shame sort of approach. That there should be some mechanism where the CEO has somebody walk into your office and say, it really is the CEO. I just authenticated. I'm authorizing it. I'm going to sit right here next to you. We're both going to handle that. And then after the fact, whatever that fallout is, it gets resolved. But if anything, maybe you get that call from the CEO saying, hey, I understand the situation. I appreciate what you did. We need to find a way to streamline it. That's part of a cultural shift. That's a trick. And that's how to also avoid that pitfall, as opposed to having to explain to the CEO why you unlocked his account, and he's the CEO, he or she is all upset because you unlocked their account and they got attacked. Okay? So part of that zero trust is also a cultural shift. Okay, so what are some other things we need to do? That education, that awareness. Boy, that really comes back to, from an end user, that they know what the threat risks are, or they hear about them, and it's not just okay, here's the long list of what's going to happen and what the bad actors are doing, but something that they can understand, they can relate, and whether that's more than just a pop-up that your email says it came from an external source. Ideally, you should have text messages if you're using those for work. This is coming from an external source. Different things that help you protect. So again, leverage automation, leverage that knowledge, secure your logs, secure your traces, dumps, your telemetry, your temporary and scratch areas, and make sure that your data protection, your backups are doing and working as they should be, and that everything is up to date, everything is current. Okay, so what about data protection for a zero trust environment? This comes back to that don't be scared, be prepared. Okay, so you've detected something, you've deflected it, or your technology has, okay? Now all of a sudden something was detected, but the rule hasn't kicked in, maybe it's not current yet, and something has gotten through. All right, now you've got to do a restore, you've got to do a restart or recover, something that starts with an R. Okay, so right off the bat, you need to verify that your data protection is actually working. Can something actually be restored? Can you bring a single file back? Can you bring back a single database table or an email box? Or do you have to bring everything back? Or in the course of bringing something back, is that going to cause a problem? Okay, and who's got access to those resources for doing a restore, a recovery, or rollback? Who's got access to those? How are they protected? So this means protecting those environments, but it also means testing them. It means testing not just, hey, can I recover a backup? Yep, it came back off of disk or tape or cloud, whatever. No, go a step further and verify, okay, it came back, it's on the disk or solid state, whatever, and that not only is it there, but it can be accessed by the database. It can be accessed by the email system. It can be accessed by the document management system, whatever it is, so that you have application verification that things are working, as opposed to just saying, yep, it came back, check the box, let's go have lunch. End-to-end recovery, restoration, rollback testing, that's part of it, okay? Also, as I mentioned, who's authorized to access the very parts of the data protection? Can a user start a restore, and can the user designate where they want it to restore to, and is it actually authenticated or not? Again, this comes back to that authenticating who they are, that the data protection, the logs, the tools, the databases, that they're protected, they're encrypted, and that there's that identity access management to be able to take care of things, and that they're up-to-date software. This also means expanding from legacy old school 3-2-1 data protection, having 3 copies, at least on 2 different systems or devices, and at least one of those offline, off-site. Okay, New School 4321 is risk adding another dimension, i.e. emphasizing that you have 4 or more copies or versions, and that there are at least 3 copies or versions. You can flip-flop, but it's putting emphasis around not just a copy, but also that point-in-time version. You might have 3 copies, but they're all corrupt, i.e. you want to have multiple versions. You want to have multiple versions, but you want to have a copy in case one of them gets deleted or corrupted, okay? But you want them on at least 2 or more different systems or devices or types of mediums, and at least one of them is offline, and that offline could be offline local on-prem, it could be offline off-site, it could be offline in the cloud, it could be on a different medium. It could be on disk, it could be on solid state, it could be on tape, whatever your preferences are. But it's around that whole idea of just adding another layer, another dimension, another aspect. Okay, real quick here, excuse me, we got to talk about data protection gaps, the good, the bad, the ugly. And real simply, air gaps are good, isolated access protections, i.e. that's that one offline. It just makes sure that somebody can't go and get access and simply delete your backups or your catalog. Time gaps are good. That's that interval of different recovery points, enabling your recovery point objective, whether it be with a backup or with a copy or a snapshot, a consistency point, a checkpoint. It's having that point in time. Now, the bad gaps are gaps in time where you missed a protection interval, gaps in coverage where backups ran, protection ran, snapshots ran, replication ran, but they didn't capture what they should have. And that ties right into gaps in consistency, which is, yeah, you've got data, but it's not consistent. Things are missing. Maybe parts of it are corrupt or parts of it are damaged. And then the ugly is when you go to recover, when you go to test, and what you thought was recoverable, there's missing copies, missing or damaged versions. Things are not what they're there. Not all the pieces are there because you just simply trusted that everything was okay. They weren't verified, and they weren't verified end-to-end. So those are a couple things to keep in mind and keep in perspective. All right, let's start to wrap up here. Don't be scared. Be prepared. Learn from other incidents. What happened? How were they attacked? Assess your environment. Use new and old things in new ways. Simply swapping out old and using things in the same way, well, guess what? It's the old way. Okay. Watch out for treating everything the same. And awareness, training, awareness, insight. What can happen? What's likely to happen? And what's the impact? And what can be done? How to detect if something is nefarious. Have that granular protection. Again, be prepared. Protect your data protection, your logs, your security, your certificates, your keys. All right. Got a couple more here real quick. Protect your devices. Authenticate, as well as your security and network protection at endpoints, all the way from your browsers and your apps on your mobile devices, all the way to the core. Make sure that they're all protected. Again, that user, worker, partner. Watch out for social engineering, phishing and vishing, voice phishing, tailgating, and different paths. Making sure your devices are logged out, that they're encrypted, that they're locked, and they're not just left out there in the open for somebody to leverage and use. And protect against theft or damage. All right, wrapping up, what can you do? Well, real simple. Everything and everyone is a threat risk. Understand what those threat risks are and their impact. Where are things, or how are people going to be attacked? How scalable is your current production? Can it scale? Are you simply relying on whatever the newest technology is, which today it's AI and Copilot, Chat GPT? Okay, great. Those are all fantastic, but what about somebody who's been able to do some social engineering and work their way around that using those same tools or versions in nefarious ways. So that's what we have to watch out for. The technology is fantastic, but it's how they're used and what we're aware of. And again, work with your partners, your vendors, your service providers. Put together a vision, strategy, plan, how you're going to go about doing that. Where you can learn more, my books, my blog. I'm on Twitter. If you want to get in touch with me, but please, no spamming, no phishing attempts. And then we'll go from there. So with that, David, do we have some time for some Q&A?
We certainly do, and we have a lot of questions. And before we get to them, I'd like to remind the audience that we can take questions up until about 5 minutes at the top of the hour in order to give you a short break before the next session. So please send them on in now. And let's get to this big list of questions. Greg, if you want to follow along in the console, I know you addressed some of these, but in that case, you can just summarize and provide more context or new angles. So let's get started. The first question, what are some tips for outsourcing or using a managed service to handle your zero trust?
Yeah, good question. Is if you're simply going to, well, here, we're just going to have somebody else take care of it. Okay. Look into them and, one, what are their best practices? What are their templates? What are their guides for educating your end users, your partners, your clients, workers, whether they're knowledge workers, IT workers, whatever they happen to be, front of house, back of house. What do they have to be able to support all those? But the other thing is, what is their track record? What have they been showing up in the news? Have they been showing up in the news because others who rely on their services have been having issues, have been attacked? And this has come up recently. So part of that is you want to understand is what are their safeguards? Okay, yeah, they're going to tell you we've never been attacked and we've got all these marquee logos, et cetera. But what is going to happen? And this comes back to going through and looking at some of the different postmortems, Dave.
Okay, next question came in early on. The question reads, do we have to swap out all of our hardware and software to enable zero trust?
All depends on what you're really doing. If you're just simply doing, like, say, a network refresh and you want to start enabling a zero trust environment, that might be part of your network upgrade where you're replacing technology for other reasons. On the other hand, you may have existing technology that might need to be upgraded. Maybe some pieces might need point updates or point replacements, but that you can leverage a zero trust paradigm, a zero trust approach that over time you do bring in some newer, different technology, whether it be hardware, software, cloud services, whatever. So I think the simple answer is zero trust should not have to require a complete rip and replace. You could certainly leverage it, but you also want to look at how can you leverage your existing as well as new technology in new ways, i.e. use it to implement a zero trust paradigm.
Okay, great. Next question reads, what are some common tricks to use to watch out for the tricks bad actors are using to get you to do something?
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned it earlier, David, which is that the old approach classic was spelling, grammar, things like that were dead giveaways. It's become a lot tougher. Now you may have really nice grammar, really nice spelling, but things that I look at, you know, whether it's in an email or a document or something else, or however it's being presented to me, is does it make sense? Some of the AI tools are really, really good at correcting the grammar and the spell check, but they'll correct them in such a way that you're like, wait a minute, that doesn't sound right. And I don't know, maybe you've seen like even on like some TV or some other videos where somebody is reading a text and all of a sudden they're repeating certain things like multiple times, 2 sentences apart, verbatim. And it's like, what? Wait a minute. That doesn't make sense. Little things like that. Bigger picture, certainly still checking. I mean, hopefully you've got software that's picking up and detecting bad URLs, bad nefarious sites, addresses, things like that. But just before you click on something, take a time out. Even if you just got to just breathe in for a moment or just relax. Don't click on it right away until you're sure what you're about to click on or what you're about to respond to is really what somebody is or says they are.
Okay. Reminder to the audience, please send in any questions you have. We have about 5 minutes left. And Greg lives and breathes this stuff, so this is a great opportunity for someone to get some expert one-on-one discourse. And let's move right along. The question reads, what's the most important tip and what to watch out for with zero trust?
I've said it several times, so it must be important. Don't be scared. Be prepared, okay? Verify something, someone, before you trust it. Just because somebody says, hi, this is Greg Schultz and I need you to do this, verify that it is actually Greg Schultz. I don't mind somebody, when I'm calling in and you got to play the game, yeah, here's my information, here's et cetera, and, as a part of an authentication, I don't mind that, especially if I'm also validating who it is. When I get somebody calling up and saying, hey, we're so-and-so, by the way, what's your address? Oh, sorry, I just moved. I'm no longer at the address you're calling. All right? So if they know who you are, shouldn't they have your address already? It's almost like a little bit of common sense coming into play.
Okay. Well, last question. I know you touched on this, Greg, but the question is, can you explain the difference between 321 and 4321 backups along with air gaps? I mean, I know you explained that, but this question came in, and can you just summarize that and add some context?
Yeah, no worries, because you got different vendors running. It's 321 or it's 3.521. It's 3.75. Yeah. Okay. It's a really, really simple paradigm of you want to have multiple copies of multiple versions, okay? And whether you want 4 versions or 4 copies, that's your choice. But the key point is that you have multiple versions, you have multiple copies of those versions, and that you have those entities on at least 2 or more different systems or devices or mediums. We're giving a lot of flexibility here. And at least one of those is off-site and preferably offline, okay? That's the basic gist, because what you're doing is you're protecting against all your copies being corrupted or damaged because they backed up something wrong. But you also want to have those different versions and multiple copies of those versions so that you can recover from or to different time intervals. You want them on, say, 2 different backup systems or backup devices or locations, and you want at least one of those off-site, whether it's just outside of your building, whether it's somewhere local or in the cloud, but also preferably offline where somebody just can't easily get to it. Hopefully that makes sense.
Makes sense to me. Well, it looks like that's all the questions we have time for. So thanks again, Greg, for a great presentation and answering all of those questions.
No worries. My pleasure, Dave.